Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. This is week 2 of Bootstrap, where we'll be examining Bootstrap just a little bit more. And so in examining Bootstrap, last week we started looking at some Bootstrap stuff. We learned how we can use Bootstrap in our websites, how we can add it into things. We also started to look at how we can work with it in regard to creating custom CSS that goes along with our Bootstrap material, just by adding stuff into our own CSS files and maybe using that important keyword to do some overrides there. Today we're going to focus on the grid system. We're going to spend a lot of time focusing on the Bootstrap grid system just to make sure that we all understand it. And we'll start to build a site just using Bootstrap, and I'll use the Bootstrap documentation to kind of work with that there. So we are talking about the grid system today. The grid system is our big focus. And so in talking about the grid system, I think we mentioned it last time, and we mentioned how cool it was to use. I think I told you all that, I've brought Bootstrap into a program before just so I could use the grid system, just because it makes gridding that much easier. But Bootstrap's grid system, it's built on a series of containers and rows and columns, and we kind of looked at that last time, right? And that's one of the things that I don't really like as much about the Bootstrap grid system, is just based on how many containers that it uses, right? Like, it is super easy to implement, but it uses so many different containers to put elements inside of elements inside of elements that it does make it a little bit difficult to kind of keep your markup sensical, keep your markup understandable. But it is a simpler alternative to traditional box model positioning, and I would say it's even a simpler alternative to just standard flexbox or just standard flexbox or grid, because it's already done a lot of the hard work that we would have to do for flexbox and grid on the back end. It's done that for us already. So, it's good. I think it's good that we don't really have to worry about that here. So I think it's, we say it's simpler than regular box model positioning here, and that's definitely true. But I think it's even simpler than using grid or flexbox out of the, just in our own CSS properties, just because the people at Bootstrap have already done work for us. And so with our flexible, the Bootstrap grid is based on flexbox. So when you use a grid in Bootstrap, you are using flexbox. So those of you who have been in the Web 2.15 course, where we've talked about responsive web design, and we've looked at the different advanced positioning techniques of flexbox and grid in there, we looked at flexbox. And so our original Bootstrap developers here have Bootstrap as the basis of, or have flexbox as the basis of their grid system in Bootstrap. So even though we're calling it a grid, it is just a one-dimensional flexbox layout, as opposed to our CSS grid layout, which is a 2D layout. Which is why whenever we're using this in Bootstrap, our grid is kind of dependent on the row. Like, if you remember last week, we looked at the row, we put like call-md- some number between 1 and 12 as a class on our container. And we would put that in a row. And that would create us, basically a cell in our grid there. But it is specific to the rows. So when we describe flexbox as being one-dimensional, what we're talking about is that flexbox deals with the layout in one dimension at a time. Flexbox can only deal with things vertically or horizontally, not both, which is something that we kind of covered in Web 2.15 when we were talking about that stuff there. With, grid being the opposite, where we can do things both in columns and in rows. But since we're dealing with Bootstrap, and Bootstrap utilizes flexbox, instead of maintaining the idea of columns or rows, we're just going to think about it as rows, right? So I think that's another thing that makes the Bootstrap grid system a bit easier. is that, you know, you're not thinking about it as rows or columns. You're not thinking about rows and columns. All you really have to think about it in is rows, and it's a lot easier, I think, to wrap your head around. But it is based on a 12-column grid system. And so we talked about that last week, right? We said that a row can have up to a 12-column width. And this width is sort of arbitrary, right? Like it's baked into Bootstrap, and it is a responsive width. So when we're talking about our Bootstrap grid system, it has this 12-column system to it. But it has different breakpoints and different responsive values that will allow you to shrink it down or scale it up based on viewport, right? So, you know, and again, it all kind of revolves around this idea of containers and rows and columns. When we're looking at our container essentially controls the layout. So our container is our main container. And we did talk about creating a container last week. And we talked about the idea of having a fixed container or having a fluid container last week. If you remember that, our fixed container and our fluid container were, you know, they were very different in the way that they handled the data that was put inside of them. And so let's just, and one of the things that we can see here that we didn't really talk about last time is that when we add one of these container classes, whether it is our fixed container, which is our dot container, or just regular old container class, or our fluid container, which is our container-fluid class, it adds a little bit of padding to the box. 15 pixels to be precise. So I've got a VS Studio or Visual Studio Code window open here, ready for us to kind of work in. And I'd like for us to kind of refresh ourselves a little bit on kind of how we work with Bootstrap and what we're doing here as we approach this stuff. We have the getbootstrap.com website here. And this is where we go for everything Bootstrap. We have those those docs. I'll open those in a new window so we can use those in a bit. And if we click on our download here in the upper right, that gets us to where we can get our Cdn files. And we are using Cdn files here again. For what we've done so far, we only really need to worry about the CSS, right? We don't quite need that JavaScript yet, but we can go ahead and put both of them in our site by just clicking copy here on this CDN versus JS deliver. It gives us a copy to clipboard here, and that will allow us to paste it in our site. So now we have Bootstrap in our site via the CDN. And if you'll remember, we said we like to use the CDN because if other people have used this before or visited a website that utilizes this CDN to put Bootstrap on their site, then your users already have that cached and it saves that load time. And it also takes a little bit of stress off of your servers, albeit not much because we're just talking about a CSS and a JavaScript file here. But it takes a little bit of stress off of those files. And so now we'll just create a container here. So since we have those CDN files linked in, our project will pull them in. I'll create a container. We'll call it main. And I'll give it the class of fluid container. And so that fluid container is, again, a Bootstrap class. And so just so we can kind of see it here, let's save that. Let's look into our Bootstrap documentation and let's get an understanding of, well, background color. Let's make this a different background color. Right, and so if we look at our template here, we see we have a starter template, different stuff here. Maybe if I type in color in our doc search here, that'll help us out a little bit. See, we've got some theme colors here. We got all of our colors. These are all CSS variables here, so these are being pulled in through the SAS or SCSS. So we aren't able really to use these variable names by default. Let's just add a primary color here. I think that'll work for us. If we just add a primary to that, and then we'll open this up with live server. We'll just see what we got going here. Okay, didn't quite work the way we wanted it to. That's fine. Let's just search background color just so we can remember. Ah, yeah, it's BG dash primary. Of course, I don't know how I forgot that. But we also don't have any content in our main yet, so it doesn't have anything in it. If we put some content in here, just a little paragraph, just so we can see that. There it is on our screen. All right, we got this nice blue bar up here. If we wanted to add some custom CSS to this, I have a CSS style sheet already added to my project folder here, but I haven't brought it into this project yet because I wanted to wait until after I brought in Bootstrap. So I can go ahead and link href equals our style.css and our rel equals style sheet. Again, because if we want anything that we have in our CSS file to override the Bootstrap file, we need to have it second or later on in our head so it can interpret that. So now we can select our main element and set a min height to 100 VH, and that'll help us figure this out. So now we have a nice big blue background covering our whole screen, so we can see this a little bit better. And we'll put some different boxes of different colors in here in our site. Right, so in order to do that, let's go ahead and add some CSS here. I'm just going to want to use squares for the time being, and then we'll change things up and make them a little bit different. So I'm going to add some sections into my CSS, and I'm just going to put my aspect ratio as 1:1, 1/1. So that way, when my grid system from Bootstrap determines the width, it'll just apply that width as the height automatically to make things easier. So now, in my CSS, I can create, say, a div. A div is really good to create our class of row for our Bootstrap, because a div is non-semantic, so it's a good thing that we can kind of use to wrap around different elements to kind of make our stuff work the way we want it to work. And then in here we can add a couple sections. So let's add a section with the class of, let's see, that'd be call-md-6. And let's add another one because that's half of our width. All right, we want to make sure these numbers here, like we said last time, we want to make sure all of the numbers that are in a particular row add up to 12. So in this case, 6 plus 6, that's 12. So we can save that. We don't have a color on those yet, so we need to get us a background color. Let's use that BG-warning there. We'll put BG-warning on one, and we'll put BG-info on the other. So let's add the class of BG-warning here. and bg-info here. So let's save that. And now let's see what we've got in our live site. So these are our gridded areas. You can see they're both right beside one another, which is great. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for here. You can see some of the stuff that we might want to do. Maybe here in our personal style sheet, we can set a box sizing, or we need to do this on our asterisk selector. Box dash sizing, border box. That should help us out a little bit. Might be some other stuff that we need to do here. But we see we have our two big grid areas here, and if we resize, it resizes accordingly. And let me try to get a little more window here so you all can see that. Now, one of the interesting things here is that you see when we hit this breakpoint, all right, our flow changes, and it changes from a horizontal flow to a vertical flow for mobile devices, which is great. Right, so that's pretty easy. And let's just let's take and make that height something different. Let's make the height 100 pixels and just make it a static height for the time being. And our Bootstrap is still determining our width. And I think that's a little odd too. I don't think it should be doing that. Let's see if we can figure out what our problem here is with that. On our main, it might be the min height situation. Nope, that's still there. There's probably some kind of margin or padding somewhere. Maybe if we add some reset rules to our page, like margin 0, padding 0, that might fix us. And it doesn't look like it worked, which that's kind of strange. I'm not entirely sure. Never really seen that happen before. Utilizing Bootstrap. Might be a bug. Might be something that we have to submit. But we can start to see the grid system in action here, right? We see this is our 2-column grid. And as we move into other areas, we can see more grids, right? So if we created another row, right? I'm just going to create another div. And I'm going to give that div the class of row. And I'm just going to copy these in there. Now I'm going to copy them in there a couple times. And I'm going to save it like this. And you might be thinking, well, what happens if your numbers don't add up to 12 inside of a single row? What happens then? Well, this happens. And it's kind of hard to tell because they're all just stacked on top of one another, right? So maybe I should stagger my colors here. Let's go and let's move this one here. Just to stagger my colors. Move this one down here. But you can see that they break off into another line. So if you want them all on a single line, you need to make sure they add up to 12. Or else they'll break off and they'll go onto another line. Right, and we can see that when we go to this point. Now, what we want to do here is we want to change these to put them all on one line. We've got 4 items here. We want to make sure they equal 12. We can take these and make them anything we want to as long as all the items on the row equal 12. So if we want them to be all equal column widths, we just change them all to 3. And that'll make them even column widths for us. We can see them there like that. Or if we wanted to get a little fancier with them, we could say, oh, well, I want the first one to be 5, the second one to be 2, and the last one to be 2, right? If 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 3 is 10, plus 2 is 12. So we save that. We look at that here and we see it kind of just shifts everything over. Right? Everything's still on one line and we can grid everything up like this. It's just a little different. Even if we wanted to take our 2-column grid, for example, and have one big column and one little column, well, the best way to do that would be to say, I'm going to have one column that's going to be like a 3-width column and one column that's going to be like a 9-width column. And now I have one shorter column, one longer column. And we can make these as tall as we want to. We can, add any content that we want into them, that we want to add into them. Put any of that in there. Basically just do whatever. And it's going to work for us. Right? So let's see that in a bit of an other way. Right? Essentially whatever we're doing here kind of works in this sort of way. We have these different prefixes that work with stuff as well. The call small, the call medium, and the call large, and the call extra large. And really it doesn't matter what you use because you get a similar outcome from all of them. We see that there are 12 columns per row. These columns are nestable, so I can actually put another row inside of one of these rows, and it'll create a little sub row for me, which is pretty cool. Or I can put multiple in there and have a sub row for it. Have a little sub grid, which is really great. Either one, all of these are really great, and it's something that we want to take advantage of as we're building a site, and we can do it quickly and easily in regard to this here. And in fact, we might just be able to switch these to a regular old call, and that might make things a little bit easier for us. Save that there. Let's get rid of this -md here, just so you can see that it's basically the same, regardless of what you put there. And really, I think probably just regular old call is probably good for essentially every application when we're building sites like this. Because, you saw it kind of jump a little bit, but not much, right? And whenever we resize our site, it's still, in this case, with regular call, we're not seeing, that's the big difference here, is that we're not seeing it reflow. So if you don't want it to reflow, you can just leave it at this. If you do want it to reflow, you do your small, your medium, your large, or your XL. And I think nowadays, like the big thing there, and like the thing that we're looking at here, is this is your breakpoint. This is your breakpoint. So this is where it breaks from that, those rows to a singular reflowed column. So it's 540 pixels for small, 720 pixels for medium, 960 pixels for large, and 1140 pixels for extra large. And as we just saw with extra small, it doesn't break. Right, so really ideally, come to think of it, as we're looking at that, small might be the best one to use. I like to use medium all the time, but I think small might probably be the best one to use because that's closer to our mobile resolutions. But really, I think small or medium, either one, is the one that you want to use for this. And we can just see that when we break it down, get it to that point where it's too small all the way down, then it changes from that grid layout to that vertical flow layout. And if we look at it in a different way, like we see this kind of grid that can happen, right? Like this red shape here was kind of built on this idea of a 12-column grid. It's hard to kind of make out on the video, I think. But essentially we have 4 different rows here. And in each of these different rows, we have a cell width of the same width all the way across. So the first one has single width columns. The second one has double width columns, or 2 times width columns. three wide columns, and then finally, or actually that would be 4 wide columns and then 6 wide columns. So I've got a site that I'd like for us to build. So I'm just going to take all of this that we have in here so far. I'm going to take it out of there. And I'm going to take the BG primary off of my main here. Everything else I think we can leave. And you know, I'm also going to take everything out of my style.css here. And so what I'd like to do is I have a little folder here of just some different things. I used this in some of the beginner classes just to kind of make a quick site this week, but I think it would be fun to kind of take this copy and work it in, and we can just use our documentation to try to help us build a site with this material. We'll use the copy and we'll use a picture here. And I think I'll open up my Cloudinary here on another window to use the picture. So let me do that real quick here. Cool. So we've got this copy here. This copy is for like a Halloween party that's coming up. And we see that we have a pumpkin carving Halloween party. Well, let's start out by just doing some standard Bootstrap markup, putting this information in here, and then we'll see how fancy we can get it, right? So let's start out by adding a header here to our document. We'll use a header tag. We'll put an H1 in this header tag, and that's where we'll put this a Halloween pumpkin carving party text, just like that. Let's see here. Let's make a simple nav, right? I think we can make a simple little nav here and do something with that. Like maybe if we added a nav tag, then we can add some LIs. We'll add an LI for href equals. We'll just use hashtags for this. Well, this will be home link, so we can use index.html. And maybe we can make another file for directions. So like this will be home page. And then we'll add another link for directions.html. We'll put some directions on that page. And we'll call that directions. And so let's add another HTML file, directions.html. We'll add that to our project. And we'll save what we have so far. Now the only Bootstrap that we've done so far is we still have our fluid container in our main, right? And so that's not really going to give us much of a visual into what we're working with here. So this is all default Bootstrap, since we haven't applied any special rules to it yet. Got a little nav, which we'll work with in just a bit. And we've got an H1. Let's add some of that body copy into our document. So we've got this: you're invited to a frightfully fun pumpkin carving party. Right, so let's just put this into our main. And let's add this into a little container. So we'll add a div here to make a row. We'll go ahead and give it a row class. Class equals row. And inside of this, we'll have a little 2-column layout maybe. We'll make a section. We'll give it a class of information. Right, just something that we made up so we can add some custom rules to it. And we'll give it a class of call-md-8. Why not? And we'll put all of our text in here. Right, and this is going to need a little bit of data manipulation here. Just to make it kind of look nice, I found this text in particular on a like a little invitation template site. So like none of this data is real, it's just like template data. So we'll save this and we'll just see what we have so far here. And we're going to need to do some markup here with our text. Well, we can see our text stops here at this point, and that's because of our grid in action. Let's just add some breaks here at the end of our lines. Pumpkin carving party. We'll wrap that in an H2. And then we'll just put breaks after everything else. Just because we're just building a little quick site. And since we're just building a site here, let's add some emojis here to pumpkin carving party. I'm gonna hit Windows key, semicolon, and just start to type in pumpkin. There's our jack-o'-lantern. We'll add one there, and we'll just copy it and paste it on the end there. So here's what our site looks like now. So we can see some things that are, maybe some issues here. We need some margin or some padding on this header here. We need some, maybe some text alignment here. Maybe work with some background color stuff. We'll have a look at all that here in a little bit. What else do we have here? We have the directions. We'll put those on the directions page. We have some haunted words here, and we have some images that we can use. Let's throw some images into this other column that we have here. So we'll add ourselves another section here. We'll give it a class of images, and we'll give it a call-md-4. And I've got some great images in my Cloudinary here. I'll just take several of them and just put them into our site. So we'll just take and put img src equals. We'll throw that one in there. Alt equals empty alt text for a decorative image. And we'll just add a couple more here. Just like that. So now we have some images added to our site. Looking pretty cool. You can see they're on my column over here. And we can just start to work with this a little bit more, right? Let's add our haunted words here underneath this pumpkin carving party. We've got that list of haunted words here. It's pretty cool to have this list because Bootstrap does some stuff to some list items that we'll look at. So let's add this list in here. We'll put it in this section here. So this is an unordered. We need another H2 for our haunted words. This is a paragraph. We have an unordered list. And each of these are a list item. So let's just turn them all into list items really quickly. You know, most of the time using Visual Studio Code is great, except for when what you want to do is in opposition to kind of its default behavior. So great, now we have our list. And so we can work with this. Right? We have a baseline for a site. And we've only put a couple things in Bootstrap on it so far. Right, so let's... one of the things that we looked at last week was a display. Using our display property for display notation on... That's the wrong display property. We're talking about display for text here, not display like block. So we need to find our typography. And these are the displays we're talking about here. Display-1, display-2, display-3, display-4, display-5, display-6. So what I want to do is I want to take and I want to add that display-1 to my H1. So we're going to add a class equals display-1. And now that's made my font here really big. Really big. Let's make that menu just a little bit easier. Right? Because what we have here is a 2 wide menu with 2 links on it. So this menu should be really easy. We can take this nav and we can set it to class of row. And we can just give these list items a class of col 6. Since we only have 2 list items in our menu, we probably can just use our regular call. We don't need them to break into separate lines, right? Just because we have just 2 menu items in a menu. Just like that, we have a nice menu, some nice menu items set up there. When we're looking at our typography, we can look at our text alignment here. We see we have a text center here. We have text end. We have all these different types of alignments. So I can take the parent box here of both of these, which is our header, and add a class of text-center to it. and that will center up our text. So it's centered up our text in our items here, in our link items here, and it's centered up our heading, which is pretty cool, right? So already we've got a little thing set up. We can look at the idea of padding. Right, we have our items for layouts here for margin and padding. We have spacing utilities that we can use. So we use an M for margin, a P for padding, and we can have margin of padding of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or auto. So if I want to add more padding to my header, I can add a P-5, and that'll put a lot of padding on my header. That might be too much padding. And actually, I think it looks pretty good. You know, we got this little bit of visual separation here now. Looks different. Not too bad. Right, let's add that text center to this item as well. So that's that section. We'll have to put another thing around that. Let's put a div around that. So we can put a div around this here, and we can give it a class of text-center. And we can move this div closer to the bottom of that. And so now we have that centered up here, right? You see, we're making small changes, and we're doing pretty much everything in our markup, and it's making big things happen. Right, so when we're looking through our documentation, we can look through our documentation at all of this stuff that's in here again. Like, for example, if we go back to our content and we look at our typography again, one of the things that we could do is just look around for some of the stuff that we want. And oh, look, we have here lists. We have here a list style. And we can actually unstyle our list, which is kind of, you know, not really what we want in that situation. But here we have some responsive font sizes, and that's what we want to kind of work with here. To get our fonts to be a bigger size than what they normally are, we'd want to do that in our own CSS. And we'd want to use M to work with them. So I might want to take that, this information class, add it over here, dot information, and give it like a font size of 1.3 M. Right, and so that's going to be basing it off of the font size that it's already set to in Bootstrap, so it'll just kind of make it a little bit bigger. Right, and we see that there. We can make it even bigger, 1.5 M. Save that, have a look at it. And that's looking pretty good, right? Nice and big. We can add some margin here to this. I think some margin might be, or some padding here might on this box might be in order. So let's find this box and add another class to it of P5. So now we have some padding on that. It's looking pretty good. And maybe we can take and on this div here, maybe we can add a B4 for margin bottom 4. Or is that what it is? Let's go back and look at those. I need M-B. I need M-B. M-B-4. So I can save that. And, well, where is my margin? Let's read this documentation a little more closely. No dash, just MB. There we go. Right? So this isn't just, just about using this. It's also about reading documentation. Because there's a lot of stuff in here. And if we learn how to read our documentation, we can use whatever we want. So we can add some margin to the bottom of different elements. We were adding margin here to the bottom of this div here. Let's ramp that up a little bit. And there we have a little bit of margin. So now that's looking pretty good. All right, so just quickly and easily using the Bootstrap guide here and the tools, we've already gotten ourselves off to a great start. Let's start adding some color into this. Why not? Let's add some color to our header here. Work with this. We can see we have this list. Actually, we were looking at that list style earlier, so we could actually use that for that. What was that? That was our unstyled list. So we could just add a list-unstyled property to that nav. So it is a row and it is a list-unstyled. So that'll get rid of those list disks there. Looking pretty good. Let's add some color. So we were looking at these colors earlier. Right, and we can actually see these colors in our CSS if we, do that inspect, because it's loading all of them. So we can actually see them in use, and we can actually use these in like our regular CSS files, right? So by default, Bootstrap kind of wants us to use these, because these are the named colors that it gives us. But when we look at our page and we right-click and we inspect, and we look at our body element, like we can scroll down through here, and we can see this list of colors here as CSS variables, and we can see we have a var bs orange that we can apply to something. So let's try to apply that to our header and just see how it looks. So we will we'll focus our header in our CSS. Right, we've written very little CSS ourselves. Focus our header and make the background var --bs orange. Was that it? Save that. And now we have an orange header. Right, so obviously we want to do some stuff here with some other stuff that we've got. Like we've got these link elements. They're hard to read now. So let's play with those. Let's put that warning color behind them maybe. So we can just use some like advanced selector rules here. Header, nav, LIA. We're going to make the background what is that? Warning. BS, var VS warning. Or it might just be var warning. Let's see. We might have to look it up. Yeah, we'll have to look it up really quickly. So there are our colors. It's BS-warning. Okay. BS for Bootstrap. And so we can see that's just behind the link there because that's all we're styling. But if we're styling the list item, which is what we'd want to style here for our background color, we can save that there. And that'll give us something a little bit better. We can also see that we probably want to put some margin or really some padding on this. And we can change up our padding here on the heading to make it a little more sensical. Right, so let's make this header. We've got the P5 there, but let's change the PB to 0 for padding bottom 0. Then we can save that. That pulls that down. And really, I think the best thing to probably do here would be to just take our padding and make it 0 and make PT 5. Looks pretty good. We can put some padding on those list items there. So if we look at our list items, we can just put like padding -2, padding -2. Make that font size a little bigger if we want to. Like we can just take this and font size 1.3 M. Or let's just make it like 1.5 M. Just have it the same big size. We can do that. Right? Look at how little CSS we've written. And we're making something pretty cool here. We can add a little bit of padding to the bottom of that, right? Like we could take and we can add like P-3 to the bottom to our list of classes for our nav. So it has a little padding on the bottom of it. We could put that, or we could increase the amount of padding that we have on our list items. Might make it look a little better. Maybe we up those to P-4. Something like that, right? Maybe we want to add a little bit of margin to the bottom of that. So we take that H1 and we add a little like an MB-3 to it to give it just a little margin bottom. And I think we can do a little bit better with that, right? I think we can make it like a margin 5 here and just give it more space. Looks pretty good. And so, you know, one of the things that we see here is that, you know, there's a lot of stuff that we can work with. We can go to our directions page. We can go to our home page. All right, let's go ahead and like put that stuff on that directions page. So I'm just going to take and I'm just going to copy everything out of here. Put it into my directions. Just like that. And then I'll just... I'll remove basically everything from this. And I'll put my directions in here. Directions to the party will be in H2. In fact, we might want to take any classes that we added to our H2Os over here, which we haven't really done that, and do this back over on the directions page. But then this is an ordered list because directions have to be done in order. And then we'll just turn all of these into list items. And there. So we'll save that. Anything. So now when we go to our directions page, we have some directions. Something got a little wonky there. There's our T. It looks like we might want to add a little bit more CSS to that section. So we'll add this call. Really what we need is the P5 there. That's all we really need. So we'll add just a P5 to this div, P-5. So that does things a little bit better there. Home page, directions page, home page, directions page. So let's look at these images here pretty quickly. We do have a whole in our we have a whole section on figures in our Bootstrap documentation. So we can add different classes, right? And like one of the big ones that we want to add is our Img Fluid. And that will take our statically sized images and automatically turn them into fluidly sized images. So we can add a class equals Img dash fluid to all of these. And that'll make it to where when we resize our site, it'll resize the images with the column, which we see that happening there, which is pretty cool. You know, now that we have that, we can add a little margin, like a little MB3 to all of those. Gives us a little bit of margin there. Top one might need some MT. So maybe some MT-4. Who's to say? Maybe we want to center these up. So maybe what we could do is add a M-auto here, and then we're changing our M, T, and MB. Does that work? It's hard to remember all of these things, so it's Who's to say? All right, we'll just let it go. So we've got this. We can put a little background color behind it. We can put our own background color behind it if we wanted to. So we can take and highlight our images section here. .images. Background of hashtag 884400. Like a dark, like burnt orange type of situation. See that in there. Got our directions page, got our home page, all of our invitations. With our images, our figures, we can do some different stuff with them. MX Auto, that's what we want. That's what we want. We want MX Auto for the images. Hard to remember. MX Auto, MX Auto, MX Auto. That still didn't work the way we thought it would. Maybe we need to add the D block in here as well. Because we do need to display images as a block element before they're margin 0 auto. So let's do that. That work? Hey, that worked. We needed to add that D block element to it. This just goes to show you how important the documentation is, right? We want to make a quick site. We want to go through things. Quick, sometimes not so quick. All right, and then when we look at our images some more here, we can see some other stuff that we have that we're able to do with this. There's all sorts of stuff in the documentation. We're really running long today, so I'm just going to let that kind of be it. I'll turn back on the music and I'll hang out in the chat just a little bit more. I'm going to just encourage you all to read through the documentation as you're working on things, because that's going to help you out a lot. Like obviously there's a ton of stuff here, and I was just kind of building a site just on the fly. And I think we did a halfway decent job with it, even though we didn't have a plan or anything going into it. I think it, even as quickly as we made this, we made something that looks pretty nice, using minimal code. And I think that's the big thing about Bootstrap, is that we get to do that. We get to use a minimal code and make something that looks pretty decent. So I'm going to encourage you all to kind of use that documentation as you're working on your labs, things of that nature. So we're going to turn the music back on. I'll hang out in the chat for just a little bit, just in case anybody has any questions. If you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please send me an email, and we'll figure them out. But that's all that I have for you for now. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.